Great. Well,
There you go.
there we go. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's exciting to have the chance to get to know a whole new county, new county central committee, new county commissioners, district attorney, sheriffs, all of the above. So my name is Sara Gelser Blouin. I have served in the Oregon legislature since 2005. I was in the House from 2005 until I was sworn into the Oregon State Senate in 2015. In 2014, I made the decision to run for the state Senate because there were 16 Democrats in the Oregon State Senate, including Betsy Johnson. And that meant that there were many priorities that were important to me and to people in my district that ended up failing on a 15-15 vote. And I came to understand that that 16th vote ran right through my district. And so if I wanted to see progress in those areas, I needed to step up and take the risk and run. So I ran against Betsy Close, who at the time was the Republican incumbent. And with the help of a lot of supporters and a lot of volunteers and knocking on a lot of doors, we won that election. Before I went to the state house, I served on the Corvallis School Board for 5 years. I went to college in Indiana, a little school called Earlham College. I studied history and education, and then I got my master's degree here in Corvallis at Oregon State University. It was a Master's of the Arts in Interdisciplinary Studies with a focus in history and women's studies. And I actually wrote my master's thesis on the politics of Oregon women. It was looking at the women of Newburgh in the 1870s and the very and 60s, and the very interesting conflicts between Abigail Scott Duniway and the prohibitionists. She really liked whiskey, so they didn't get along, and that influenced what Newburgh women had to think about women getting the right to vote. So it's entirely possible Abigail Scott Duniway's whiskey love prevented women from getting the vote for about an extra decade. So in the legislature, both in the House and the Senate, I have focused a lot on the needs of people whose voices aren't heard very often. Children come to mind, children of all kinds, kids who are in our foster care system, kids who are unhoused, kids that are involved in our juvenile justice system, who've dropped out of school, kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and those that experience significant mental health needs. I've also done a lot of work in the disability and aging area, a lot of work around domestic violence and sexual assault. I'm really proud to have introduced and passed Oregon's Domestic Workers Bill of Rights that looks at folks that serve as nannies and housekeepers and landscapers, and have been really proud to be part of a coalition that's looked at raising the boat for every worker and family in the state of Oregon, whether that was the establishment of paid sick leave, the creation of what will be, I believe, the best state organized paid family leave program in the nation, our equal pay law, and eliminating the subminimum wage for people with disabilities. And I was very proud to be part of the coalition this past year to extend overtime protections to farm workers who have been left out of equal protections for so many different things for so long. I think in recent years, we've been able to see how that inequity stretches out in working conditions and otherwise. And that is a reason why the life expectancy of a farm worker in Oregon is a couple of decades shorter than non-farm workers in the state of Oregon. And that's an absolute travesty and injustice. The other area that I have focused on is trying to create a more sustainable future for all of us as it relates to our climate. I was sharing with someone the other day when we were last together in person in the Oregon State Capitol, and we left because of walkouts. The things that tore the legislature apart were guns, vaccines, and climate change. And if you look at our newspapers over the last few weeks, I think what has dominated us, the things that are significant challenges for Oregonians are the spread of the COVID pandemic, which points directly to immunizations, the continued increasing problem of gun violence, both between individuals and the use of firearms for self-harm and in domestic violence, and then, of course, climate change, which we see in drought, in fire, in extreme weather. These are difficult issues, but we have to address them, even if it's hard. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to keep having these conversations. And I think the last several years have made that really clear. In terms of my personal priorities in the upcoming session, I'm hopeful that I'll have the opportunity to continue chairing the Senate Human Services, Mental Health and Recovery Committee, to serve on the Education and Judiciary Committees. I believe that the criminal justice system, the human service system, and education are all tightly tied up together. You can't address any of the levers in any of those without focusing on the others. As it relates to education, I'm really focused on making sure that all kids have access to a high quality public education. Right now, we have over 1,000 kids in Oregon who are being denied the ability to even go to school because they are disabled. That's against state and federal law, but it's happening anyway. And the Department of Education says they have no authority to enforce that or to enforce some of the challenges that we've seen in school boards, like in Newburgh or in Alsea. So I'm working to change that. We've all read about challenges with youth who are experience significant mental health needs and the ability to access services. I have legislation I'll be proposing this session to really use some innovative tools very similar to what we use within the developmental disability community to deliver self-directed services to kids and their families in the community at home, so they don't have to leave home to go to a residential placement. Residential placement is the worst possible place for a child to land. Occasionally, kids will need short-term acute residential treatment, but that is rare and it should be short-term. Unfortunately, right now across the country, we have private equity for-profit firms that create what are basically fake treatment centers. They prey on desperate families, desperate states, make a lot of money, and abuse a lot of kids in the process. And that really has been the focus of my work these last couple of years. I learned that we had about 100 kids that we were shipping out of state to these organizations. That caused me to learn about them. Over the course of 18 months, I was able to advocate to get all of those kids back to Oregon, to advocate to have a number of these organizations closed all across the country, and to be part of a large team of people led primarily by survivors, raising the profile of these terrible organizations that are abusing hundreds of thousands of kids every year. And that has given me the chance to go to Washington, D.C. with, of all people, Paris Hilton and a lot of survivors. We're currently working with Senator Wyden and Senator Murray on federal legislation that will build on the work that we've done here in Oregon so that other states can keep kids safe too. And the last thing that I would mention that I'm proud of in terms of what's come out of this work in the last couple of years, I was surprised and honored to receive the Carl Levin Award for legislative oversight from the Wayne State School of Law in Michigan. The prior recipients of that were the chairs of the Senate Intelligence Committee around the Russia investigation, and that was related to just the work that I was able to participate in to get a bunch of public records and make sure that Oregon and other states were held accountable and given the tools they needed to actually protect kids. At the end of the day, I'll just close with, I believe that really good public policy happens if you listen to the experts, and the experts are the people that live in that place where policy and real life meet. And so I think that we have to really focus on people that are living these experiences, not just our own best intentions. And that's why in everything I do, I try to create space for those who are going to live the policies that we're writing, to lead the discussion, to be focused in the discussion, and to make plenty of space for them in hearings, work groups, and other places. And with that, I am really happy to answer any questions you might have.
That was excellent. That's excellent. Let's open it up to the floor for some questions. Aileen.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. First, I want to thank you for two things. I want to thank you so much for running again. Fabulous. You're one of my favorite legislators.
Oh.
And I want to thank you. Really, you're so responsive. If you call, you answer. It's really wonderful. And I'm not even your constituent. So. And I want to thank you also for voting against Senate Bill 16, which was a terrible land use bill. Unfortunately, it passed, but you tried to not let it pass, and I appreciate it. So this question is about land use. Right now, there is a push going on by land developers to open up farmland for huge business complexes like Intel and for housing developments. Do you plan to support those efforts, or do you plan to attempt to uphold Oregon's current land use laws?
Thank you, Eileen. And first, thank you for the kind comments. And I need to thank my staff, because nobody can run an office that gets hundreds and hundreds of emails every week without a really great staff team. And I've been really lucky to have that. But I really firmly believe if you take time to write to me, somebody should get back to you. Sometimes we mess up, things fall in the spam filter, get misfiled, and
No, you
hate it when that
called me
happens.
back. You called
I
me
remember that.
back.
I remember that
Yeah.
conversation. I remember that conversation. I try to do that too. As it relates to land use, it's hard for me to answer that question with a great deal of specificity without seeing the specific proposal, especially as it relates to housing. One of the things that I do firmly believe that we need to live within the spirit of our land use laws. We've done some great things here in Oregon to protect our farmlands, to protect our public beaches, to really think thoughtfully about how do we build up and out and in and around, and to prevent sprawl. That's one of the reasons why Oregon is a really great and beautiful place to be. I also know that we have a profound humanitarian crisis as it leads to housing, and that we don't have enough housing. We're not building housing fast enough to meet those needs. And so I would be uncomfortable saying that absolutely I would always vote against anything that might go back to relook at, are there ways that we can continue to meet the same goals and adjust lines for housing that is preventing sprawl, especially when we have a leader like Speaker Kotek, hopefully soon to be Governor Kotek, coming forward, who I think is one of the few people that has a really good handle on the complexity of the housing crisis that spans all the way from folks who are unhoused to those that are middle income folks that can't get housing because it's so big. Now, what she's done is really push back. And I think this goes to how do you comply with what we've always understood to be our values around land use? How do we build in? How do we do this infill? How do we find this middle housing? And I think that has been a really, really key ingredient. I know that if she did that, she needed to talk with other folks about allowing expansion in some other spaces in very controlled kinds of ways. And I don't want to sit here today and say absolutely no way off the table before I've had the chance to see what any and all of those proposals might be to just really address that humanitarian crisis. So I will really be looking to Tina and asking hard questions. We don't always agree, but I just don't want this moment to go without passing. This governor's race does matter, and Tina is head and shoulders above the rest when it comes to the values that I think embody the Democratic Party, and certainly the values that I live by.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to have you be thinking about some other questions. I've got one that has to do with the environment, and that is that how do we balance the needs within these seasons of the increased fragility of our ecosystems and the fire and the droughts and the risk that we have there, and dollars are precious. So how do you think there's a way that we can find a path to build kind of sustainability through these next 15, 20 years of environmental challenges?
So I think that is exactly what we have been trying to do for the last decade. And one of the reasons this is becoming more and more expensive and more difficult to get a handle on is that the longer we wait, the harder it gets to address it in a sustainable way. I know my husband was, working with some wisteria the other day that hadn't been cut back in a long time, and it ran its tendrils under the yard. Probably the whole thing is going to have to go away, just because it got out of hand for too long. And that's the real challenge that we have right now, and that's why we can't afford to wait any longer. Now, I really I think we've got really smart folks that are working on our climate legislation that are broadening the thinking beyond just carbon, as we're looking at methane as well. We're finally at this point where some of our carbon reducing initiatives are kind of increasing emissions of other things in other places, and competing with some of the other environmental initiatives we've had. We've got to think really carefully about those things and think about how that can turn into jobs. But if we are not able to address the consequence of fire, everything from people losing their houses to not being able to work, to not being able to go to school, to leaving our communities because they just can't breathe. That is much less sustainable than actually making the investments necessary to secure our future.
Good answer. Good questions. Good answer. Any other questions from the audience? Mary Ann.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Thanks for being with us. Along that line of sustainability, I know one of the things I've been looking into more recently is sea level rise. And even though I live here in the Willamette Valley in Salem, it turns out that as the sea level rises, my property is going to be waterfront property. Well, if my property is going to be waterfront property and I'm near the fairgrounds, that also means that there's going to be all kinds of roads and railroads and other routes of transport that are also going to be underwater. What are we doing to plan for future routes of travel that could possibly be impacted, and it's going to have to be paid for way ahead of time?
That is an excellent question, and one that I don't have a specific answer for. I think the way that we have started to get at some of that is, kind of thinking about our emergency preparedness and how does government respond when everything is wiped out. We've certainly had a test run of how do you meet when you can't all be together. We still have some work to do as it relates to that. And again, it comes back to it's hard, but we need to take dramatic action soon, or else, it's we have to. Those are the consequences we're looking at. And I would say for the last probably the last 12 months, for the first time, I have started to worry that in my kids' lifetimes, that they will see these things. They will see a planet that looks profoundly different than what we know today. And even a year ago, 2 years ago, I believed strongly in the need. I couldn't picture it or imagine it, and it still seemed like a theoretical thing. We can still fix this, and I still believe we can't be hopeless and not fix things. But those are very real questions that we need to address. For now, we have inadequate mechanisms really to look at our transportation infrastructure. I'm really proud that we have looked at building more multimodal transit into our transit packages and looking at mass transit and bikes and ped routes. But the stack of things that we need to get done, including bridges that are at significant risk, that threaten to isolate communities, it's long and the resources are inadequate. And we now have to deal with this real challenge of we're really pushing to more efficient vehicles, which is really important, but we pay for our roads with the gas tax. And the more efficient the vehicles are, we will have more roads, more wear on the roads, more miles traveled, and less funding to keep up with that. And that's frustrating for people for whom the transition for a lot of people has been the savings on gas. So sorry, I kind of went on a little tangent there, but it was a really good question.
Good answer. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, could you take the last 5 minutes or so and just give us kind of your closing statement on why the folks on this line should give you their vote in November 8th?
So I hope that you will give me your vote based on what I've done in the past. I am sure that there are votes that I have taken that each of you have disagreed with, but I hope that those that I've represented for the last 8 years and others that have looked at my record will find is that I tell you the truth about where I'm at. My mind is open. Sometimes I change my mind and take a different position later on. I don't think that's a bad thing when people do that. I think that's part of listening and learning. I believe that we can have disagreements, and I believe that we should act even if we don't know all the answers. Sometimes I think we're too timid just because we start kind of running in circles around what will the unintended consequences be. Great example of that is our mental health system. We have been stuck for a really long time, but one thing that we know for certain, what we are doing is not working. Trying to make a change, trying to make it better, it seems pretty hard to make it worse. than where we're at right now. So I will, if returned to the Senate, I will continue to focus on people. I will continue to ask agencies to focus on the real experiences of people rather than the regulations on the page. And I will continue to kind of push us towards what is possible versus what we can't do because there's a mystery or uncertainty. And I will do my best, even when disagreeing, to help people have confidence that they are served by people in their legislature and agencies that care about people, that are responsive to their needs, and are willing to try to meet them where they're at.
That was an excellent closing statement, but you just made me think of one other question I'd really like to ask because you bring the voice of experience, having been in both the House and the Senate, and this question comes up a lot. And somebody earlier used the word trick, but I'll say, what skills and techniques have you found to be effective in trying to get people to come over from the other side? And I think you know which other side I mean. How can we get better at that? Because it just seems so fractious right now. I mean, if somebody just parachuted into our country today, I don't think they'd think this was the same United States that was here 10 years ago.
I think that there's a lot to that question. I think on a personal level, it has a lot to do with personal relationships and recognizing that we can disagree about things, and people that are our opponent on one thing might be our supporters on another. Some of my very closest friends in the legislature are some of the most conservative Republicans that are serving, and some of those folks have really helped me when I get stuck on things. And a lot of the things that I work on, that I lead on, aren't necessarily partisan, but they're wonky or they're depressing. And some of these folks have really helped me. I think it's also being able to talk about where we differ and recognize that not everybody, most everybody is in it because they care deeply. And I think an example of that, I am unapologetically, absolutely 100% pro-choice. And I'm so alarmed with what's happening with the Dobbs decision. And I believe there are many people that use abortion on the other side as a political cudgel to just bully people. I also know that I have colleagues for whom this is a sincerely held personal belief. And one of those people is a guy that's leaving after the session. His name's Dwayne Stark, Republican from Grants Pass. This is a guy that he's up to 13 children. He does all the things you would want people to do, that because he has adopted so many children. He brings in foster children. He brings in, elders who have no one to support them through hospice, and he does that work and stands up for them. So when we passed the reproductive health equity bill, which was like a thrilling day for me, I knew that was a hard day for him. And I walked over and I sat with him and asked him how he was doing, and acknowledged that was hard for him. And I think we have to do that. We have to keep seeing the humanity in one another, because if the last few years have shown us nothing else, I think it's that laws are words on paper, and our society has been held together for a long time because the basic assumption in our social contract is that we're all going to do the right thing to the best of our ability. We're not going to break the laws. We're not going to lie. We're not going to steal. We're not going to betray each other. And we've lost that because there's nothing that we can really do to make people not do horrible things. And in the past, it's been a small thing, but I think our social media, our lack of a neutral media, the last couple of years of not being together have made it easier for everybody to march off into real extremes, which is not to say extremes in beliefs, but extremes in the expression of those beliefs and the ability to have a conversation about the policy that sits in between those beliefs. So I think that's where we really need to step in. How do we bring more facts back in, and how do we step into those spaces and find the people that we can trust and acknowledge the value that people bring? Because everyone that gets elected there, they're serving a district, and they want to be able to go back and tell the folks that trusted them and sent them there that they showed up to do something for them. And we need to make that about things rather than about political points. And that really comes to the community. And we need all of you to hold all of us accountable to what are you doing for the people, because all of the people in every district are my people, and I want all of my colleagues to see the people in my district as their people too.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer. I think we expect that our lawmakers should be earning the respect and the trust of their constituents, but I hadn't really thought about earning the trust and respect of your colleagues across the aisle. I hadn't really thought of it in those same terms. So thanks for kind of bringing that home, because that is something you have control over, and you have control over that every day and every minute of how you carry yourself. So thanks for that. That was a great answer. Thank you. Thanks so
Anytime.
much for being with us. Good luck with your race. If there's
Thank you.
anything you can do, if you'd like to put your anything about your campaign in our chat, feel free to do that before you log off, just so that we'll know how to support you if we can.
Great. And if you go there, there's an Act Blue link there, and I believe it also takes you to a survey for things like lawn signs. That's some help that I need in Marion County, because that's new for me and it's a fairly small area that I'm in. So if you know folks that have lawn sign locations in my district, send me a note and we'll get them out there.
Thanks. Excellent. Good ask. Well, there's the right people on this call to hear that message. So thanks so much for that.
All right.
Thanks so much for being with us, Sarah. Good luck.
Take care. Bye-bye.